Hello OpenBoxes users, this is a tutorial on how to create and edit a location. So one thing to note is that creating and editing a location is an administrative responsibility. So if you don't see this configuration tab here on your menu, that means you don't have administrative permissions and you won't be able to perform this task. So contact your system's administrator and make sure that your permissions are set appropriately before you move forward with this video. Another thing I want to note right off the bat is that there are a lot of that locations are actually very complex and there are a lot of different things you can do with them. So what I'm showing you now is the default settings and the most basic settings for how we create and manage locations in OpenBoxes. However, if you're someone who is setting up an entire new instance of OpenBoxes and you want to look at all of the different ways that you can configure your locations, I would highly suggest that you go to our OpenBoxes wiki that has some more information, detailed information about exactly how to configure locations in the way that works for your specific organization. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about sort of the usual default ways that we treat locations in OpenBoxes, but there are a lot of other options if you're looking for something a little bit more customized. So, in order to edit a location, the first thing I'm going to do is go to my locations list. So normal users, of course, can see some locations in OpenBoxes. They can see the location chooser menu, which shows all of the depot locations available in OpenBoxes. Everywhere you can click and enter. And in different dropdowns in the stock movement workflow, etc., they see the other locations in the system as well. But what normal users can't see is the full list of all locations in the system. And to do that, you want to go to Configuration and then Locations. So this page gives you a list of all of the locations in the system. You'll notice that it does start out filtered by depot locations. So you can, if you want to see all locations, you can just remove that filter and then research, and then you'll see all of the locations in the system. So from this page, if we want to create a new location, we can click Create Location here. One thing that I would love to note is that before you create a new location, it's always worth just searching to see if the location already exists. Sometimes someone looked it up in a dropdown and it was misspelled, or potentially the location has multiple names, so someone looked it up under one name and not the other. So I would highly recommend, in order to avoid duplicate locations, that if you get a location creation request, you should definitely search for your location name, and then if it comes up, you can just instruct the person, oh, this actually does exist in the system, and you didn't see it because it has a slightly different name, or it wasn't spelled properly, or something like that. So let's assume that I have searched for my location and I haven't found anything. So I'm going to go here to create a location. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see this main location screen. The location tab is here, and I have a couple things that I need to enter. The most obvious is the name. So the name is exactly what you're going to see whenever you look in a drop-down list, whenever you go to the location chooser. The name is the main way that the location is going to be identified. So I'm going to say my name is new location 3. So I'm going to type in new location 3 here. Now the next thing here is location code. This is a little bit of a confusing label for this field. So it isn't a special unique code like a product code or like a shipment code. This location code is just an optional acronym or shorthand for the name. So sometimes in certain screens, we are referencing the name of multiple locations and they're quite long. And so if there is a location code in here, it will instead reference the shorter location just to make everything, all the text fit nicer on the screen. So if you did have, for example, a hospital that has an acronym, you could put the acronym in here, but you could also just leave it blank. It's not required. I'm going to skip organization for now, and we're going to come back to it once we've discussed location type. Location type is the most important thing you need to choose when you're creating a location. So there are several different types of locations, but only a few that actually matter. So the first type of location is a depot location. Depot locations are what you see when you go into the location chooser in the system. They are the locations that you can log into, that you can see inventory, that you can manage everything about them. So if you are creating a new depot location, that location will appear on the location chooser and be available to manage. That's what a depot location is. The next type of location is a supplier location. Supplier locations are locations that are not available to manage in the system, but they are available to send stock to depot locations. And finally, there are wards and pharmacies. Wards and pharmacies and dispensaries, all three, are the same thing functionally. They're named differently, but they do the same thing functionally, which is they are locations that receive stock from depots. So a depot is a location where you can log in and manage inventory. A supplier is a location where you can't log in and manage inventory. The inventory is infinite, and it sends stock to your depot. A dispensary, a pharmacy, or a ward is a location that also you can't see their inventory. The inventory is not tracked in OpenBoxes, but you can send stock to it from your depot. So suppliers send stock to you. Wards, dispensaries, and pharmacies receive stock from you. So in this case, I'm going to say that my new location 3 is a supplier. And I'm going to choose supplier here. Now, the next thing I can do is choose a location group. Depending on your organization, you may have preset location groups. They could be based on the country. They could be based on a specific group of facilities that's in a location or that does the same thing. The location groups can be used in a wide variety of ways to manage your depots or your wards. So what you choose would depend on how your organization has structured their location groups. In this case, we've structured our location groups essentially by country. So if this supplier is in Liberia, then I would choose my location group to be Liberia. It's also okay not to choose a location group. It's not a required field. So if your organization is not actively using location groups, that you don't have to worry about that. You can just leave it blank. And finally, the manager is once again not a required field. You can either select the person who's actually doing the work. If it's a supplier, you can select the person who's actually managing, or if it's a depot, you can select the person who's actually managing the location. For a supplier, I would just leave it blank. And once you've filled out those fields, for a supplier, you can press save. And so now it's brought me to the bin location page. I'm just going to go back to the location page. And I'm going to show you a few things. So you might remember that we left the organization blank. We didn't fill anything in here, but now it has automatically generated an organization for us. So what is the organization field? The organization field is essentially saying it's like the location group, but it has some additional functionality around it, especially if you're doing purchase orders or if you're doing other kinds of financial reporting. So the organization is your business or your financial unit that this location belongs to. So If it's a depot, let's say you're part of a nonprofit health system that is called Health for the Poor. You might have 10 depots, and all of them are part of the organization Health for the Poor. So you would have an organization here, and you would select that organization, Health for the Poor, for your depot. For a supplier, each supplier will have its own organization, unless you have multiple suppliers that are part of the same conglomerate. Usually when you create a new supplier, the name is the organization name, right? So new location 3, that supplier is part of, that location is part of organization new location 3. So for suppliers, you do have to put an organization here, but what OpenBoxes does is if you don't put an organization, it just fills one in for you. It just says, oh, well, since it's a supplier, obviously the organization is the same as the name. And we can look at how to create an organization for depots if you want to do something a little bit differently. But for suppliers, the best thing to do is just leave it blank, and it will automatically create an organization that is a supplier organization that has all the right permissions for you, and apply it here. So the next thing I want to do is just check my configuration and my other pages. So my configuration page has a few important things. One is the active and inactive button. So this active button, if it is checked, that means the location is visible in the system. If it's unchecked, that means the location is invisible in the system. And so if you're trying to delete a location, OpenBoxes won't allow you to delete locations, but it will allow you to mark them as inactive. If you've added a location and you can't see it, chances are perhaps you've accidentally unchecked this box and the location is inactive. So just make sure that your location is actually active. The next thing is your supported activities. This will autofill, but I just want to make sure that it's always good to check that you are using your default settings. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there are a lot of complex ways that you can do customized locations. In this case, if you're creating a supplier or a depot or a ward, you should just use the default settings, and OpenBoxes will choose for you what kinds of activities this new location should be able to do. You only want to uncheck that if you've done a lot of reading about exactly how to configure locations in OpenBoxes. The next tab is an address. It's not required. However, if you are using some of our special document templates, if you're using the PO template, or if you're using shipping document templates, there are fields for addresses. So if you want the address to appear on your shipping document templates, you need to enter it into these fields here. And then finally, zones and bins are things that are only for depots. We don't care about the zones and bins in our supplier locations, so we can just ignore those. So that's how you create a supplier location. What's different for a ward or a depot? The answer is not that much. So I'm going to just walk quickly through creation of a ward and a depot just to show you the differences, but there really isn't too much change. So if I go to create a location, in this case, let's create a ward. So I'm going to say, this is a ward as my name. And then I'm going to skip my location code. I also don't have to choose an organization. So OpenBoxes will not require me to choose an organization. However, I can choose one if, for example, this ward is part of a health facility that's part of an organization that's already in the system. So if my organization here is Zanmi La Santé, I can choose an organization option here. I do not have to. It will just stay blank. The location type, I'm going to select ward. As I mentioned before, you could also select dispensary or pharmacy. They are the same thing. And for location group, I'm going to select where this location physically is. So I'm going to select, in this case, Haiti. So I'll choose one of the hidden location groups. Once again, the manager for non-depots is unimportant. So then I'm just going to save. And then I'm done. For exactly the same for the supplier, you can make it active or inactive. You should always be using the default settings for your supported activities, and you can add in an address if you'd like, but that's all there is. So what about depots? Depots are a little more complicated. The first thing you want to do is do exactly what you've done before. Create a location and put in your name. So I'm going to just put like Depot 35. Now for the organization, you have to select an organization, and OpenBoxes will not autofill it. So for depots, if the organization already exists in the system, which it should if you've ever set up a depot location before for this organization, it should already exist in the system. So you can just search for the organization that is available to you. And I'm going to search for PIH Boston. This depot is part of the PIH Boston organization. If for some reason the organization that this depot belongs to does not exist in the system, you can go to Configuration, Organizations. I'm just going to open this in a new tab and add an organization here. And then you can just put in the name of your organization. So if you're creating a new organization, you could just type and click Create. And then that organization will be available to you to choose in this drop-down menu. So if for some reason your administrator has not already created the organization for you to select, you can create an organization here and then select it in this drop-down. Your location type is a depot. And your location group, once again, you choose based on the logic of your organization's location groups. So in this case, I'm going to say that if I said this was in Boston, I'm going to choose the Boston office location group. And the manager is actually not required still, even though it's a depot. But in this case, you do actually have someone actively managing the location. So I can actually pick a user and assign them to this depot. And then I'm just going to press save. And so once again for depots, just like everything else, you're going to want to make sure the active button is checked, to make sure you are using the supported activities. For depots, there are actually special settings you can do with the supported activities, and we'll go into that in another video. But for now, just use the default settings. And then you can add the address. And then finally, you can add both zones and bins. So zones are the larger sections within a warehouse, like for example, like the cold zone, or it's a specific room within the warehouse. And then bin locations are, the specific shelves. So when you're setting up a particular depot location, if you're going to use bin tracking, you'll want to add zone locations and bin locations. And to do that, you can just press the button, type in the name of your zone, press save, and then you can do the same for your bin location. Type in your bin location code and press save. You can also do these via import and export. Take a look at our instructions specific to zone locations and bin locations in order to go through that example. So now we have seen how to create the 3 major types of locations, and we've also done a little mini tutorial on zones and bins. The last thing I'm going to show is just how to edit a location. So the main thing is just to go back to the locations list, search for the location, and then when you have searched for the location, all you have to do is just click on the location name, and that will bring you straight back to the location edit page. So if at any time you want to change anything, you want to update an address, you want to make something inactive, or you want to add zones or bins or change the zones or bins, You can do all of that by just going to the location tab and then clicking on the name, and it will bring you back to this page. Any changes that you make, you just save, and that will save all of the changes to the location. One thing to note is if you change the location type, it will also change how the location behaves in the system. So if something is a depot and you make it a ward, just be prepared that it won't be available in the location chooser anymore. So think carefully before you make changes to the location type, because it will change the way the location behaves in the system. So that was a tutorial on location creation. Thanks so much for listening.